Hello everybody, my name is Pinch Raccoon, Raccoon VTuber and citizen of the United States against defenestration, and I'm here to ask you one very simple question. When you kill a monster in Monster Hunter, does it go to heaven or does it go to hell? They say all dogs go to heaven, but does Lalabarina go to heaven? Can the pearly gates be opened for Raydao? Does Blanganga burn in the pits of hell? These are the questions that we are here to answer today. As you can see, I have constructed a tier list here, very very basically, of all of the at-launch Monster Hunter Wilds monsters. This does not include Title Update 1 and onward. So far, just going to be heaven and hell. Let's go ahead and jump right on into it with our first monster, Ajarikon. Now, Ajarikon, the humble exploding gorilla, I don't think that much is particularly wrong with him, to be honest with you. I think that he's just kind of a nice guy. He hangs out with his homies. He wrestles. You know, he's a sporting gentleman. I think that he has a decent shot of making it into heaven. Now, Guardian Fulgur Anjanath very early on is posing a problem for us, because the Guardian monsters are made by man. They are not God's beautiful creations. How do we quantify? How do we quantify what is ostensibly a clone? Does a clone have a soul? Can you put a soul in a clone? Does that soul have to do with... Because wouldn't you have to clone the soul to begin with of the previously existing thing? So does it matter how good their previous iteration soul, like the host of the clone? Does it matter how good they were? Ultimately, though, I think my opinion on the matter is going to be summed up with the inclusion of a brand new tier. Please welcome the inclusion of the Ceases to Be tier, which implies that any monster put here, upon killing it, simply does not exist anymore, and their soul goes nowhere. Because they may not have one. We aren't sure. Guardian Fulgur Anjanath is the first to go into the Cease to Be tier. Congratulations, Guardian Fulgur Anjanath. Next is Guardian Arkveld, another Guardian. I do believe that is a Cease to Be situation. Next we have normal Arkveld. Now, normally, Arkveld, to me, is the closest monster to a straight-up murderer that there is in base wilds. It kills not even really for sport, just kind of because it can do it. That is unsettling and would read to me as murder. And I'm no priest, but I think that murder, generally speaking, is bad and would send you to hell. Now here's the problem. Arkveld managed to come back from extinction on the basis of having a guardian version of itself lay an egg, presumably. Now, to me, that can't happen unless Arkveld was in some way supported by God himself. Am I saying that Arkveld is a Christ figure? Maybe. Am I saying that him coming back from extinction is the same as Christ rising on Easter after being dead for 3 days? Maybe. Maybe that's what I'm saying. So, I don't know if I can justify sending him to hell, because I don't know if it's reasonable to question his actions, because he is clearly, in some way, supported by the Lord himself. Therefore, I think that this is a heaven situation. Next, we have Balahara, who's just a little freaky little guy. I think that Balahara, you know, he's a bit of a trickster, he's a bit of a scavenger. I am gonna make maybe a controversial statement. I'm gonna say hell, actually. Balahara strikes me as the type to go to hell, because it just doesn't make sense to me that, you know, this little worm guy, I don't think he wants to go up, I think he wants to go down. Additionally, you know, he's covetous. He's getting all those Fulgurite crystals and he's putting them all over his body. You know, those aren't his. And then he's also a trickster by making these traps like that. Yeah, hell. Hell for Balahara. Balahara will burn in hell. Now for Blanganga. Blanganga is kind of similar to Ajarikon in how I view him. He's just kind of hanging out. However, I think that Blanganga is greedy and perhaps wrathful, I might say. So I'm going to say hell, actually. Because Blangongo gangs up with his little homies, his Blongos, and then they beat the shit out of anything that comes into their territory. What's in there? To begin, it's the Ice Shard Cliffs, dude. There's nothing here for you. There's no food here. What are you defending, bro? So, truthfully, I think that the only reason that he can be this mad and this motivated is vanity. So, I think hell pretty safely for Blangongo. Now for Chatacabra, who goes around, spends his day eating large bugs. He just kind of hangs out. Honestly, I don't think he's, extremely pious per se, but I think that he leads a life that gets him into heaven, largely. I think he's up there. So don't worry about the hundreds of Chatacabra you will probably kill in this game. They're sitting pretty. They're sitting pretty in heaven. Now for Congalala. Now, Congalala is crass, is vain, is gluttonous, and I think that means that Congalala is going to burn in hell, actually. I think that Congalala is a filthy sinner and will burn in hell. Next we have Guardian Doshaguma, who will cease to be and will be annihilated upon his death. And now for normal Doshaguma, who does demonstrate an ability to cooperate a little bit, but they're largely kind of loners. Now, here's the thing. Do I think they're bullies? I'm not sure. I'm not sure that I think I would assign some sort of villainous intent to Doshaguma. I think that he's just kind of hanging out. However, yeah, the Doshaguma all hunt their own food. They gang up in order to defend themselves, very kind of similarly to a Jarkon in that way. I'm gonna say heaven. Heaven for Doshaguma. Congratulations, Doshaguma. Next we have Gormagala, who I think, based on the fact that between the sort of parallels that Gormagala and Shigarumagala have, Gormagala is very often treated like a Lord of Darkness kind of figure of sorts. So I'm gonna say that Gormagala doesn't just go to hell, but is like welcomed in hell. Like he's a homie there. He belongs there, Gravios, I'm actually gonna say heaven. Everything he does is in self-defense. He has done nothing wrong. He eats rocks. They're literally not alive. He doesn't do anything harmful to anyone. So I'm gonna say heaven for Gravios. Next, Gypceros, who I think goes straight to hell. I do not think that there is a case to be made that Gypceros is a valiant creature. Granted, Gypceros is he doesn't attack humans, but he is greedy. He takes shiny gems and covets them for his own, which can result in attacking. He's a trickster. I think he burns. I think he burns in hell. Him and his rubbery hide burns in hell. Next we have Hirabami, who honestly, they're just some guys hanging out. Well and truly, they're just floating around. I think that Hirabami go to heaven. Now for our first apex monster of the list, Jin Dahad of the Ice Shard Cliffs. I think that Jin Dahad strikes me the same way that like a 14th century Catholic monk in Ireland does. He's just hanging out, and we're the Vikings coming in and fucking raiding the shit out of his cathedral. I think that Jin Dahad is just chilling and therefore goes to heaven. Now, Lalabarina is vain. Is absolutely vain. Very concerned with appearances. In some ways could be seen as trying to lure people in. Generally speaking, a dishonest monster. I hate to say it because you hate to put a bad bitch down like this, but I think that Lalabarina burns in hell, unfortunately. I think that her salacious acts and vain demeanor does land her in hell, in my opinion. Now, Nerscylla is a proud mother, proud single mother, however, does, generally speaking, end up using a lot of the same sort of trickery that we've largely frowned upon in this list, which in some ways I'm willing to let it slide because she's a spider, right? God gave her that ability. she's gonna use it. But there's a line, you know? Stringing up the corpses of Gypceros, which, as we've established, I don't really like the guy to begin with, but, like, you can't just string him up in your lair and be like, yeah, okay. Like, that's some Ed Gein shit. What's wrong with you? I think Nerscylla also burns in hell. Now, New Udra is interesting in this conversation because, of course, it is very resistant to fire, right? I don't think it can burn in hell. Granted, there are plenty of circles, including the 7th, which is largely ice, to my knowledge, and I think that New Udra is surprisingly going to go to heaven. Here's why. New Udra isn't a particularly tricky fighter. He just gets up on you and does his thing, you know? And just beats the shit out of you, and then he has a bunch of kids. And, you know, good for him. Good for him. I know that we just put Nerscylla in Burning in Hell, but Nerscylla strikes me as a serial killer. So I think that New Udra, for his honorable battle tactics, can go to heaven. Guardian Odogaron, or Guardian Ebony Odogaron, is going to cease to be if the moment that you knock that dragon energy out of it and then knock its lights out, there's nothing more. It stops. Chemitrice, this one makes me a little bit sad. Chemitrice is a bit of an asshole, really. His whole thing is bluffing about, like, oh, I could kick your ass. I could do it. You know, with his big old fucking, like, gizzard and shit, and then also the glorified firecrackers that he has. And the worst part, he steals the hard-earned kills of Talioth. So I think that Chemitrice is going to hell. Guardian Rathalos, yet again, will cease to be. No soul. Doesn't exist after it dies. Simple as. Normal Rathalos, though. Now, I know what I said about Blinganga, about the wrathful behavior that it engages in. And it literally has wrath in the name, right? But you don't generally see a Rathalos engaging in outright cruel behavior. Generally speaking, what it ends up doing is fighting in the interest of protection of its territory. And in my book, protection of territory, in specifically the Wrath's case, because they are raising their young, I think that that is reasonable to an extent. So I'm going to make a slightly controversial opinion and take the happily married couple of Rathian and Rathalos and put them in heaven tier. Now for Raydau. In some ways, I'm inclined to say that Raydau will be reaching the kingdom of heaven. However, is taking the essence of the might of God that lightning is and harnessing it as one's own in the way that Raydau does, in allowing oneself to be struck by lightning and then using that for your own purposes, that strikes me as a little bit blasphemous. A little bit blasphemous. However, I could understand the claim that that's just tool use, you know? If people are capable of going to heaven and they use tools that were put in place by the natural phenomenon of the world created by the Lord, then I guess, yeah. I think Raydau, there's a question to be had about it, but I think Raydau goes to heaven. Now for Rompopolo, who, what a freaky little guy Rompopolo is. Truthfully, I don't know. I don't know where to put Rompopolo. I feel as though he is almost too much. He has so many tools. He's got poison from his tongue. He's got explosive gas out of his tail. He's got scythe claws for stabbing stuff. He's got those big plague doctor eyes. And I just don't know. I don't know what I feel about him. I feel as though, you know, maybe at the end of the day, Rompopolo is like a good guy, but it's like scary goth people. Not that I hold any prejudice towards scary goth people necessarily, but like, you could be like, what the fuck is their deal? But then you talk to them and they're really nice. And Rompopolo just seems to eat like crustaceans. It doesn't even eat the Geladron, just eats the various different crustaceans and other small life that lives in the oil well basin. So I'm gonna say An unlikely heaven for Rumpopolo. Very controversial, I know. Now for Uthduna. Gayest monster I've ever seen. Probably, and this hurts me to say, as a fellow gay person, I think Uthduna might be going to hell. But not because Uthduna's gay. I actually like that a lot. I think that, you're made the way that you're made. But I think that Uthduna's insistence on decorating itself is kind of vain. And also, diving into the water just to snap up some Gajiao whenever you feel the slightest inconvenience? That's gluttonous. So, Uthduna's going to hell not because it's gay, but because it is vain and gluttonous. Now, Xiegu is an interesting one, because the main thing that it preys upon is guardian monsters, which we have established as being creatures not of God's will. Now, what this leads me to believe is that Xiewu's ecological purpose implies divine right to perform its purpose. I think that Xiegu was put on this earth to remove the guardian monsters from existence. So I'm gonna say heaven on the basis that Xiegu was sent by God. Now, Yan Kut-Ku, it's hard to hate him, He's really just kind of a stupid guy, right? I think if you told him about the idea of heaven and hell, he wouldn't know what you're talking about. At the end of the day here, he'd just, he's a bird. He'd be like, squawk, He wouldn't know what you were talking about anyway because he doesn't speak any, human language. But I don't think that you could convey to him that death is a thing, that death is like a state of being that one can approach. I don't think that someone who doesn't know about it can go to hell, or I think they go to purgatory or something. I'm gonna say that Yan Kut-Ku, I'm gonna give him the benefit of the doubt. I'm gonna give him the benefit of the doubt. He doesn't do that much that's particularly blasphemous or evil. I think that that Yan Kut-Ku's gonna go to heaven. Now, Xoxia, I think, is the Antichrist, actually. I think that Xoxia is a man-made iconoclast for the explicit purpose of allowing man to play God. Xoxia is a living Tower of Babel to me. So, while you might say cease to be, I'm gonna say if Xoxia could go to hell, it would. But, of course, it's a construct, it doesn't have a soul. Therefore, Xoxia will cease to be, unfortunately. Despite the fact that, as the Antichrist, it probably should go to hell. Anyway, that's the list. That's the tier list. So now you know, based on my expert opinion, which monsters go to heaven and which ones go to hell and which ones simply no longer exist when you kill them in Monster Hunter Wilds. Thanks for watching and happy hunting.